Hello.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for taking me for a coaching session. I'm looking forward to it. Excited.
Yeah, I appreciate booking the session as well. Um, so our first session today. I appreciate the elaborate spreadsheet you gave me. That was um, very surprising to see. I've never had anyone who's done something like this for me, but it's very helpful in terms of labeling everything out and giving me an idea of what you are capable of and what we need to work on. Um, so still two really preliminary questions that I have that weren't really answered here. Uh, the first one is a lot harder than the second one, but it just gives me an understanding of where you're at with Mistweaver
All right.
and what we should work on specifically for today. So, what do you think is the biggest thing that you sort of struggle on with Mistweaver? Like, what do you think is something that you should recognize that you should improve upon, or something that you like just don't really fully understand?
Well, based on what I'm seeing on like WoW Analyzer and stuff, I think the biggest things are I'm not focusing enough on Rising Sun Kick and making sure that I'm not capping two charges on Renewing Mist, and so as a result, my stacks aren't as high as they could be, and that affects everything. It snowballs, and that affects
Yeah,
my vivifies and just about everything else. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And then also just inexperience with Mistweavers. I leveled it up about 3 weeks ago, and so it's kind of been a big learning curve, and I've really enjoyed the dive, but I find new things every day that I didn't know before that seemed like common knowledge for Mistweavers. So just uh, executing the ramp successfully, just because most of my experience with Mistweaver has been doing the Mythic Plus style Chi 1 minute stuff,
yep,
and so the transition to the whole 1 minute Yulon play style that's current is much different, and so just trying to figure out um, how to do the ramp reliably and the same every time, and what little variants that I need to do as far as making sure that I have soul fang infusion or whatever.
yeah,
So,
yeah. For sure. And the second question, well, sort of go over what you said. If changing from like Chi and playing like Jade Bond from like a 2 or 3 minute cooldown to a 1 minute cooldown, especially with Clouded Focus and whatnot, has been a very, very big change for a lot of Mistweavers who have played the spec for much longer than you have as well.
mm.
And it's been a very big struggle for them as well. So it's very common to initially sort of struggle with the spec. But it is pretty much something that like once you understand how it works, and I sort of simplify it for you, and you understand it in your own way. After that, it becomes like very sort of brain dead to play. It's not that intense to the point that you are like constantly having to put 100% of your thought into it. You could play the spec at like 50% capacity and still do extremely well.
Mm.
At the highest level, though, it is going to be pretty hard. Um, it is the hardest spec, in my opinion, to play in the game.
Well, yeah,
I
it's like
play pretty much every healer spec, and I play a lot of DPS and tank specs as well. And I think that Mr. Monk is definitely the hardest spec to play.
it's like a melee disc that has to ramp every minute.
Yeah, there's also just a lot of interactions and mechanics that people don't really fully understand. I won't really fully get into them today just because they're a little bit too advanced. I don't want to like complicate you with things that aren't really going to be that impactful for you right now. But if you ever get to the point where you sort of plateaued yourself, at that point, then I can introduce some of the more in-depth mechanics to really maximize the HPS that you can do, and just sort of bring out like the full potential of Mistweaver, right?
Right on.
Um, but the second question is, what got you into Mistweaver? Why Mistweaver over another healer?
Well, I'm really comfortable with priest. That's been my background for healing, and I got tired of the whole hot style of Resto Druid, especially in raid. I don't find it really that interesting anymore. And
Yep.
I tried a little bit of monk at the end of BFA when I was trying to decide what I was going to main when I was actually taking the game seriously, and I kind of kept it in the back of my mind as a fun healer, but I like that, like the whole maintenance style healing with, you know, your ancient teachings and stuff like that. Just the strength of, you know, you always have this passive healing going on with your rotation. I like that a lot, and um, I like that it's, you know, with the way that renewing mist functions, it's kind of like a smart heal disc priest, as if your atonements move around, and so they're
Hmm.
always getting full value. So I think that's really fun, and also it's just it's very active, just the whole melee healing play style. Um,
Yep.
I like Holy Pally as well, but the thing that's always kind of kept me away from it is the whole fact that you have to, you know, turn and face the raid and stuff. The whole frontal cone mechanic is really annoying as Holy
Yeah.
Pally, and that's pretty much non-existent as Mistweaver, and I like that a lot. So it's got elements that I like of the other healers, and there was an opportunity on our raid team where we were kind of unsure about our monk buff, or monk was going to go to AUG, and so we were able to find a trial, but in the interim, I was trying to figure out what you know, what would best fit the team, and so I leveled it as an option, and then I was just having more fun with it than my priest, and so and now I have much more to learn on it, I feel, than my priest, and I want to get it up to snuff, so that way if I bring it to the raid, it's not it's not holding back anything.
Yeah. And it also, like, just to learn any healing spec is beneficial for healing in general,
For sure.
because it gives you different understandings of like profiles and how to react to mechanics and whatnot. So even if you play like priest as your main, or like, you know, I alt R druid and H pal as well, and you know, playing Mistweaver for so long has helped me understand, you know, this is how I want to approach this sort of healing style as, you know, holy paladin, or as R druid, or even as disc or holy priest or whatever it may be. This is how I sort of approach it because I already have that understanding from Mistweaver.
Hmm.
So getting the understanding from a different spec is definitely very good. And to just sort of begin where we're at with Mistweaver, to give like the summary. So obviously, WoW Analyzer is a very good tool that we have, that it's done very excellently by Trevor and by Vord. They
Yeah,
maintain it and make
that's
sure that
something
it
that
is.
I've really appreciated, is how, you know, engaged and passionate the monk community is compared to a lot of the other classes and specs and stuff. You guys have got a lot going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, we definitely take a lot of pride into it, even though we're not really like a very well represented spec. We are like the lowest play rate. We always have like the best sort of like resources in terms of knowledge and like, getting better at the spec.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but WoW Analyzer is definitely our best tool for it. So to just sort of begin with it, you have these sort of like summaries, I guess, for these abilities.
Hmm.
The three abilities that are listed here are the most important things that you can sort of apply with the spec. So it's not really an understatement to say that 50% of your HPS is coming from like Rising Sun Kick and Renewing Miss alone. It's easily that number. So this spec plays with a talent called Rising Miss. Rising Miss works that it extends all your hots whenever you press Rising Sun Kick up to 100% of the duration. This mechanic is the only reason why, in my opinion, Mistweaver is any good in the meta, is because this talent is insanely good for a single capstone, or a single point capstone. It is probably like one of the most impactful talents in the game in terms of like playstyle and just HPS that it provides.
Mm.
So if I go and look at my Rashlock log, for example, which is 273k HPS, 52k of that is coming from Rising Mist alone, which is very insane. So, on the basis of Rising Mist being this strong and being this vital to the kit, obviously Rising Sun Kick is also that vital to the kit as well, right?
Yeah.
And Renewing Mist is equally as important. The easiest way of doing this is to quite literally just press Rising Sun Kick and Renewing Mist off cooldown. There is no spells that we have that are higher priority than Renewing Mist and Rising Sun Kick if Rising Sun Kick is off cooldown or Renewing Mist is on 2 charges. The only other time that I would say you want to press another ability would be to press Revival or to press Vivify to save someone's life. If you know that they are going to die in that exact global, obviously it's better to save someone's life than to let them die just for the sake of doing your rotation correctly, right?
Mm.
Ultimately, healers have to keep people alive. But if those scenarios are not met, in any other time, you would be pressing Rising Sun Kick off cooldown, and if you're at Renewing Mist charges or you're at 2 Renewing Mist charges, you're pressing Renewing Mist. Um, these take priority over everything, and it's like I really nail it down with people that I coach because it is quite literally the biggest thing that people can improve upon.
Gotcha.
95% of the people that I coach have bad uptime on Renewing Mist and bad uptime on Rising Sun Kick, and that's like the sole contributor for why they're sort of doing poor on HPS. because everything sort of stems from this in terms of Vivify HPS, in terms of Enveloping Mist HPS, in terms of Renewing Mist HPS overall. It all comes from the usage of Rising Sun Kick and Renewing Mist. So a good way of practicing it would be to go to the training dummies in Valdrakken or anywhere, or go into a boss fight in Raid, and just sort of get used to the idea of when Rising Sun kicks off cooldown, you're pressing it. You don't really have to think that hard about it, it's just whenever it's up, you press it. For Renewing Mist, since it auto bounces around and it's smart like that, you could press it on anyone and it also doesn't really matter. So in both those, you just want to press them whenever they're off cooldown. That's the easiest way of sort of like baseline playing the spec. The other abilities that you cast in the intermediate period doesn't really matter all too much. So long as these two buttons are pressed, the core rotation is going to naturally fall into place itself. And I'll sort of explain what I mean by that when I talk about Vivify in the future. But for the baseline now, these two buttons are like the most important thing that you can cast.
I
So
did have a quick question I just thought
yeah,
of. Renewing Mist, uh, if you cast it on somebody that already has Renewing Mist, does the other Renewing Mist bounce, or does it just override it or add to like the pandemic effect? That does it just add to the duration?
it
Um,
pandemics, yes.
oh, okay,
So it can pandemic up to a max duration of 38 seconds. Um, if it's a TFT renewing mist, and if it's a normal renewing mist, it's 28 seconds.
okay.
Um, Generally speaking, you don't want to cast on someone who has renewing mist. There is a more in-depth mechanic called cannibalizing, which essentially is two renewing mists go onto the same target at the same time and the same tick rate, and the one that has pretty much the higher duration or the lower duration, they fight between each other, and if 50-50 is between the two and decides which is the winner. So this
Oh,
can result in losing renewing mist uptime, because you can have a 1 second renewing mist go into a target as the same time a 30-second renewing mist goes into the target, and the 1 second renewing mist wins over the 30-second one, and it just disappears completely.
oh,
When you cast on someone, this can have the same effect, because you are casting on someone and it's refreshing that duration of that renewing mist. And if it's at the same time that you cast on someone when that renewing mist is bouncing, both of them line up on the tick rate from that point on, which means that there's a very high likelihood that they get cannibalized. So to prevent that, we always just want to be casting on someone who doesn't have renewing mist as often as possible.
gotcha.
In some scenarios, you have a lot of renewing mists out. There's sometimes where you have 20 if you get lucky. And in that case, you just press renewing mist on whoever, and whatever happens, happens. You got 20 renewing mists. It's you press revival every global. Um, but for the main part, you just want to be using it on whomever doesn't have it, and you don't really need to cast it on whoever's hurt either. You just need to cast it on someone who ideally is full HP, because then it'll immediately bounce. Which is good because we have a mechanic called Dancing Mist, or a talent rather, is called Dancing Mist, which gives us a chance to create a new renewing mist. Well, not a mist, a renewing mist of the same duration. Whenever it's either cast or when it bounces. So if you cast on someone initially, you get a 10% chance to proc it again. And since they're full HP, the renewing mist is going to bounce off them immediately, which is going to give you another chance to proc another, renewing mist of the same duration, which at that point is going to be like an 18-second duration, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
But to sort of go back over to the point of like renewing mist and rising sun kick, as you can see in the cast here, excluding Vivify, within our top three, or within our top four rather, renewing mist and rising sun kick are always there. Rising Sun Kick should always be, at the minimum, depending on what your haste is at, it should always be 6 CPM. Renewing Mist should also be always 6 CPM. So Rising Sun Kick has a hasted cooldown. It's always 10 seconds flat, but depending on your haste, it can go down to like 8 or lower. So this means that it should always be 6 CPM, because without that means that you're just like losing out on casts. But since we're casting Blacker Kick and casting Target Palm as well, we also want to be making sure that we're using the resets whenever we get the chance to as well. But Renewing Mist is always a 9-second recharge. It's not hasted at all, which
Hmm.
means that we always have a flat CPM on it. 6 to 6.5 or 6.6 or whatever number you can get it to is good. Just basically have 6 or more. That's what you're looking for.
Gotcha.
So whenever you do a log, or whenever you kill a boss on heroic, you go and log yourself, like Kazara, for example, and you're moving on to experiments next, or amalgamation chamber next. You could look at the Kazara log and be like, hey, I had 5 CPM on Rising Sun Kick this pull, but I had 6 CPM on Renewing Mist. So you could think to yourself, okay, my Renewing Mist CPM is good. How do I increase my Rising Sun Kick CPM? What you could do is go through either WoW Analyzer, which shows you the overview here, which shows when you could cast an extra one, right? Or what you do is you go into your timeline under casts, Warcraft logs like this, and you look at it here. and you're pretty much looking to see if you have a point where you can't see Rising Sun Kick on the timeline. You should always be able to see Rising Sun Kick on the timeline. If you can't see it, that means that you've held on to Rising Sun Kick for longer than 10 seconds, which is bad.
Gotcha.
So long as you can go through this and you could always see Rising Sun Kick at some point in the timeline, you're doing a good job. Um, and like I said before, everything sort of feeds into these two abilities. Like Vivify healing comes from the usage of Renewing Mist and of the usage of Rising Sun Kick. So if these two sort of lack in any capacity, everything else is going to suffer as a result. But to sort of explain how Vivify works and how we used it in the past and how we use it now, Vivify is our main sort of spot heal. It's the easiest way that we could do HPS. It's pretty much our conversion of mana into healing. Since we could spam it, and since it costs 3.4% of our mana, we can go with it very quickly. But we have tools to sort of supplement that to make sure that we don't go very quickly. We play Clouded Focus this tier because with the tier set giving us a 40% increase to our Vivify and our Renewing Mist whenever we gain AT or whenever we gain Soulfang Infusion, we can pump out a lot of HPS just through Vivify, along with Clouded Focus, which is a multiplicative scaling to it. So Clouded Focus works in the way that when you press Soothing Mist, you gain stacks after you cast Vivify or Enveloping Mist, then increases the healing and reduces the mana cost by 20%, respectively. Stacks up to 3 times. What's most people don't know about this mechanic is that you always gain the healing on either Enveloping Mist or Vivify as if you had 1 stack, regardless if you didn't have a stack or not. So what I mean by that is if you cast Vivify normally, it just heals for a normal amount. But if you cast Soothing Mist and then you cast Vivify, even though you have no stacks, that Vivify is buffed by 20%.
Oh, okay.
What this means is that it's always a good period for you to press Soothing Mist and Vivify if it's a correct number of Renewing Mists out. The correct number of Renewing Mists out to press Vivify is 4 or more.
Okay.
So getting a Renewing Mist tracker, making sure that you have one, and making sure that you're always looking to see if it's above 4 is good. Once you're at that point, press it. If it's damage is taken, you press it. That's pretty much just like the way of playing it, right? But the more you cast Vivify, the less cast of other abilities you're going to have. So we are very much capped on the amount of GCDs we have. We want to be pressing a global every single time we can. As you can see here, 65.8 CPM, which is insane. Obviously, it includes stuff like healing darts, Escape from Reality, but I'm still doing about 56 CPM naturally, right? Which is pretty much the max that you can do without OGCDs. And because we're so tight on globals, we want to make sure that every global that we are pressing is like beneficial in some way. So Vivify healing is always going to do something for you because, like you said before, Renewing Mist is smart. It bounces around the room and goes to people who are in. Which means that you can safely assume in Raid that, if you press Vivify, you're going to get at least some amount of healing, right?
Yeah.
The cutoff for that is, let's say only one person in the Raid is taking damage, right? If you press Vivify on that one person, you're going to overheal like 40%, 50, 80, 90%, depending on how many Renewing Mists you have out. So is it a good time to press it on one person to heal one singular person versus healing the whole group and just like continuing to DPS and saving that one global to DPS to potentially get more healing in the future? That's sort of like the gamble that you're sort of making. Well, it's not really a gamble. It's as much as like a decision that you're making. Generally speaking, if there's like 5 people who are injured in the raid, and I have 5 renewing mists out, I will press Vivify, so long as it doesn't impede other things. So what I mean by that is if I have Rising Sun Kick up, I press Rising Sun Kick before I press that Vivify. If I have Renewing Mist up, I press the Renewing Mist before I press the Vivify, right? If I have both those down, I have no Celestial going. I don't need to press Black or Kick or anything like that. I have enough Renewing Mist out. I could just spam Vivify at that point. So what you would do, playing Clouded Focus, is press Soothing Mist and then just spam Vivify. You want to do, 2, 3, 4 casts, depending on what you're looking at. This is like the easiest way of playing it, is you just press Soothing Mist on whomever. It could be a tank, it could be yourself. Whoever really needs healing. You don't really care about the overhealing directly, you mostly just care about the cleave healing. So this is going to be doing a lot of cleave healing since you're gaining a 20%, 40%, 60, 60, and if you have the 4-step proc on it, you're going up to a 110% increase on the healing to your Vivify after 2 casts. So because we have Rising Sun Kick and because we have Renewing Mist on cooldown at this point, we could spam out Vivify and get a lot of HPS from that.
Okay.
And like I said before, it entirely stems from Rising Sun Kick Mist. And the reason we press Tiger Palm and Blackout Kick like this is to reset the cooldown to Rising Sun Kick. But in scenarios where you need to heal, and this is often a mistake that I see people do, is they don't press Rising Sun Kick even when they have to start spamming healing. In scenarios where you actually have to start like putting healing into people, like for example Mythic Grass Shock, towards the end of the fight you have to actually start putting like serious HPS into people.
Mhm.
As you can see here, I'm very rarely pressing Blackout Kick and Tiger Palm. I'm mostly just casting Vivify as much as I can, right? So in scenarios like this where you're spamming up Vivify as much as you can and you need to actually do healing, what you would do is always make sure that you're pressing your Renewing Mist and your Rising Sun Kick, but you're just spamming up Vivify pretty much as hard as you can.
And
You're
you
using it
kind of
where it
cut
makes
out
sense.
your blackout kick and your tiger palm at that point, and you just focus on
Yes.
your other healing. Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
And I noticed that there's moments where are you like kind of doing your Yulon ramp with throwing out enveloping mists like right there on your timeline, and but you know, oh no, that was with the Yulon. Are there ever times where it's beneficial to
Enveloping Mist?
enveloping mist
No.
before? No, okay,
No. The only time you want to Enveloping Mist is on Celestial.
okay,
Enveloping Mist is a very, very weak button unless you're extending it to the full duration through Rising Mist, and it's not getting any overhealing. So we have a talent called Misty Peaks, which gives us a 2-second proc off of our Renewing Mist, which is more reason why we want to have as many Renewing Mists as we can. But has a chance for us to get Enveloping Mist for 2 seconds. This 2 seconds, generally speaking, depending on your haste, gives you about like 3.5 partial ticks, or 3 ticks plus a partial tick, which is good, because that's like the perfect sweet spot for healing in terms of Enveloping Mist. Enveloping Mist just does a crazy amount of overhealing on the hard cast, to the point that it's just not worth it for the mana that you're spending. The only time you want to be using it is during your Celestial. And a majority of this healing that comes out from Enveloping Mist is actually coming from Misty Peaks rather than coming from Enveloping Mist cast itself. Even though I
oh,
have 31 casts here, majority of it is coming from Misty Peaks. So you can see here 22k HPS, right, from Misty Peaks. And we can see that 29k HPS is coming from Enveloping Mist, which means that I'm only getting like 7k HPS from the Enveloping Mist hardcast, right?
gotcha.
And I can talk a bit about Celestial. So I have a guide on Questably Epic that goes over what you need to do on your Celestial window. Um, Pretty much this is like the basis of it. This looks complex, but since this is the exact same rotation every single time with basically no variation, after like 3 or 4 times doing it in raid, it pretty much just becomes second nature, and you don't really have to worry about like focusing that much on it anymore. So because we play Shaden's Gift and because we play Shao Hao's Lessons, we want to be using our Shaden's Gift and our Shao Hao's buff with our Celestial. It's the easiest way of sort of playing with it. And the way you do that is just before you press your Celestial, you press Shaden's Gift. If you mess up, let's say you forgot to press Shalen's Gift after you press your Celestial, don't worry about it. Just go through the cast of your Celestial normally. Don't try to panic cast your Shalen's Gift just to make sure that you're fulfilling the checklist. Just go through with it.
Okay,
Don't worry about like trying to salvage things. Once you've pressed Celestial, you have a very limited amount of time before you pretty much like run out of time on Celestial and you lose the HPS that you were going to get from it, right? So we have to make sure that if we're going to be pressing stuff beforehand, it happens beforehand. It doesn't happen during, right?
gotcha.
So in this scenario, Shalen's Gift is used beforehand. This gives us a nice buff. It could be either haste, it could be crit, it could be the duplicate, it could be triage, whatever it may be. This is a good buff for it. And then we have Thunder Focus T here. We want to be using Thunder Focus T exclusively on Renewing Mist. The reason why we want to be using it exclusively on Renewing Mist is because we have a talent called Secret Infusion. Secret Infusion gives us a percentage of stat depending on what ability we use it on. For Essence Font and for Renewing Mist, it's haste. So the way that percentage haste scalings in this game work is that they're all multiplicative. So Enveloping Mist and Vivify and Rising Sunkick would give you a flat 15% of the stats, but haste gives you 15% of the stat, and then it multiplies, it multiplies by percentage your current rating of haste, and then adds that to it. So instead of getting 15% flat, you get like 20% haste instead.
Oh, okay.
Haste being our best stat is already very good for us, so getting increased haste from that is just like um, icing on the cake, essentially. It's just win more. Um, we also get increased duration on a Renewing Mist, which is good because Dancing Mist can proc that 30-second duration Renewing Mist. and can duplicate it, which is like the best scenario that can happen. If you press Thunder Focus T and you press Renewing Mist and you cast and get 3 Renewing Mist from it, that's like winning the lottery essentially, because now you have 3 30-second Renewing Mists that you can extend up to a minute fully, which is going to give you a lot of HPS because these will bounce around. They'll give you more Dancing Mist procs, and they'll give you more Misty Peaks procs as well. So we want to be making sure that we're pressing TFT on our Renewing Mist exclusively. Definitely not on Enveloping Mist or Essence Font or Vivify. If you have to press it on Rising Sun Kick, you can. The only scenario I would say you should do that is, let's say Thunder Focus T was off cooldown, you pressed Renewing Mist, and you don't have another charge of Renewing Mist for like 8 seconds. It's better to just cast Thunder Focus T and use it on Rising Sun Kick than to sit for 8 seconds without using it while it's off cooldown, right?
Gotcha. Is there ever a scenario where you're doing that intentionally to get the verse buff to, like, I don't know, survive a mechanic or something? Is that ever a thought process, or is it mostly just to get extra value from the Thunder Focus T, just putting it on cooldown?
It's funny that you say that because I've always tried to push that idea of like using it as a defensive, even back in BFA when it was a Azerite trait, but it never really stuck.
Gotcha.
But I think that it is a very good thing to do. It is at that point a pretty sizable DR, being its 15% versatility increase. It's not going to be that insane to the point that like you absolutely need it to survive mechanics. For the most part, on progression, I would say use it on Renewing Mist unless you absolutely feel you need to use Thunder Focus T there to live a mechanic. If you feel like you need it like that, then you can use it on Rising Sun Kick. It isn't that big of a loss, but it is a loss. I would say that if you consistently use it on Rising Sun Kick over Renewing Mist, you're probably losing about 4% HPS over the course of a fight.
Gotcha.
But if you're surviving a mechanic with it, definitely do that. But you shouldn't ever really have to do that because we have three defensives, and we also just have like naturally good ways of self healing. So
Right.
you should never really feel the need to be in that scenario where you're having to use it on yourself, right?
Sounds good.
But here we have like the remainder of the rotation. So after we've set up our Shaylin's Gift, after we set up our Thunder Focus T and our Renewing Mist, so we have haste going into this. We cast our Yu'lon. And the numbers that are in green here represent the new Renewing Mist that we're creating through Rapid Diffusion, which is a talent that gives us a 6-second Renewing Mist whenever we apply Rising Sun Kick or Enveloping Mist. The Enveloping Mist ones happen at the end of the cast, which is important for us. So once we finish the cast, we go up through 5 from the Enveloping Mist cast, and then a 6 from the Rising Sun Kick cast. And this Rising Sun Kick is very, very important. This is the most crucial button in the entire rotation of the Celestial, because this extends not only your new Renewing Mist that you've created through your Enveloping Mist, but also all these Enveloping Mists also get extended as well. So this is an absolute must-press button.
I think
Here,
that's a big problem that I've been having is I wasn't valuing that Rising Sun Kick, and that just means all my all my hard work is falling off.
Yeah. So here in the scenario, these 2 Enveloping Mists, well, this Enveloping Mist at least, would have fallen off by the end of this cast, which means that you're effectively losing on the HPS with that, as well as all these this Rapid Diffusion, this one would have fallen off by the time that you would have gotten to this point, which is bad because you're effectively just losing 4 Renewing Mists at that point, right?
Yeah.
So this is what it should always look like. You're doing your 4 or 5 cast on Enveloping Mist. I say 4 or 5 because it really just depends on what the damage taken is like. If you have ramped late, so that means like the damage is coming out and you have like sort of mistimed your ramp, I would do 4 and then press Rising Sun Kick and then just spam a Vivify, because the majority of the healing from your Celestial window is going to be coming from the Vivify spam. It isn't actually going to be coming from the Enveloping Mist and the Enveloping Breath alone. Even though they do a lot of healing together, I mean, they equate to pretty much the same. This is the big part that's actually saving people's lives, right?
Yeah.
So if I snippet it down a little bit more here, you can see that, this is what's actually keeping the raid alive, and this is what allows Mistweaver to sort of solo mechanics. So we want to be making sure that
the goal in your ramp. Sorry, the goal in your ramp is that when the damage hits, you're pushing Vivify. That's the point in your ramp that the damage is hitting. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I can actually bring up a VOD to sort of show that off. Well, but pretty much because majority of our healing is going to be coming from Vivify, we want to be making sure that where do I have actual VODs? Uh, how do I?
I've been watching your YouTube, like Sarkareth and Magmarex Echo and Sarkareth ones a lot. I don't know if those are good options, but
Whoops. I'm trying to find like an actual VOD that I made, but I can't find it now. Go through it. I don't know where to find it. Sweggles, dude, videos. This one. All right. I'll mute here and I'll show you what I mean by like properly executing your ramp time. So this is an important thing. It's a concept that exists for Disc Priest as well. Essentially, our ramp takes about 6 seconds to actually like go through and to be done, so we can spam out Vivify, right? From the beginning global. So here, I know that we're going to have pools that are going to come out, and these pools on Mythic Mamrex are going to take 5 seconds once the mechanic actually goes out. So here in this scenario, I'm waiting until there's about 2 seconds left on the pools. So I'm going to cast my Rising Sun Kick before I press my before I press my Yulon, right? And the pools are going to come out here, or the spittles rather. And I'm casting my Yulon here. So in 5 seconds, the raid is going to be taking damage. I'm ramping here for that 5-second window. And I do a short ramp here because we're all stacked. So I do that 4 enveloping miscast rather than doing 5 enveloping miscasts, right?
mm-hmm.
I make sure to press my Thunder Focus T and my Renewing Mist in this so I can guarantee a 4-step proc, and then I'm casting that Rising Sun Kick here, right? And at this point, I have 16 Renewing Mists out. The damage is going to be taken in the next second here, right? I'm casting it on the tank, who is taking damage, and then I'm spamming out Vivify, but I'm already set up to cast 1 Vivify before the damage is even taken. So from this point forward, I'm getting a 40% and 2 60% buff Vivifies into the whole group here, right?
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
The first cast goes off, the second cast goes off, and pretty much everyone's sort of like stable at this point. And I've just jumped up like 4 million healing in those 2 globals alone, which is what I mean by like you do a revival per global. Because at this point, with the 4-set proc and with this many renewing mists out, it is equivalent to pretty much a revival per global.
Yeah.
And I could go and find that log specifically. And that's just sort of like the strength of it. But it all comes down to this rotation of like making sure, and this could be done without any sort of like prep beforehand. So what I mean by that is like if I go look at my Starcraft, for example, because on pull and Starcraft, you obviously don't have any time to like sort of set up beforehand, right? So how do we actually do like a meaningful HPS on pull? We have to sort of set up even before the boss is pulled. So here, I'm casting, so you don't even see my Yulon casted, but I do have Yulon casted. So I press Life Cocoon in 3 seconds, and Yulon at 3 seconds as well. And then I'm spamming out Enveloping Mist until I'm in range to kick the boss. So I Rising Sun Kick the boss. And then I'm spamming out Enveloping Mist again until my Rising Sun Kick naturally comes off cooldown. Once it does, I'm casting Soothing Mist and spamming out Vivify, right? And if I look at this HPS window here, even though I had no prior setup beforehand, I'm still doing, 1.8 million HPS raw, and my average cast of Renewing Mist is, 1 million, right? This is with no prior setup beforehand. This is just going into the pull and making sure that, I set up everything beforehand. So that's sort of what I mean by, like, so long as you're playing this rotation correctly, you're always going to do significant numbers with it. Gotcha. At the highest end, I would say that this rotation that we have here is easily like a million raw HPS in the 10-second window, so long as you're playing it correctly. And like I said before, this is like, it never really changes. You're never really deviating from this. So you could always do 5 casts of Enveloping Mist, press Rising Sun Kick, and do 2 things. You could either press Soothing Mist and do another Enveloping Mist cast here like I did here, or you could just start spamming out Vivify. Both of them work. You could choose to do either one. There's not really a scenario where either one is better. It just sort of depends on if you're casting Soothing Mist onto a tank, for example, and you know they're going to be taking a lot of damage, you can press Enveloping Mist at that point just to guarantee that you get a little bit more healing onto them and they stay alive. But for the most part, I like to just do the straight up cast of Soothing Mist into Vivify, right?
Gotcha. I think there was am I seeing in your VODs and stuff, I was seeing moments where you're doing a ramp, and then in the middle of doing, your 4 to 5 enveloping mists, you push Rising Sun Kick, and so would you still do that if it becomes available in the middle of your ramp, and then you just keep casting enveloping mists until the next time it's up, and then you start doing vivifies, or
Yeah, so that's a good question for sure. So during our Celestial, we have Invoker's Delight, and if we casted Thunder Focus T beforehand, or we have Blessings of Fear, we're going to have a lot of haste. So what this means is that our hasted cooldown of Rising Sun Kick is going to be like 6 seconds, as low as like 3.5 seconds.
Hmm.
So what this means for us is that if we cast it in between, so let me see if I can find a here where that happens. Let's say like I go through and I don't have my Rising Sun Kick up at the end of my ramp, like this for example, right? So I use my Rising Sun Kick beforehand and I have it up like this. Let's say I don't have this Rising Sun Kick up beforehand and my Rising Sun Kick comes off cooldown like between here. Because we know our priority list for Rising Sun Kick is always higher than Enveloping Mist, even if it's on Celestial, that means that we still want to be pressing it, right? So a scenario like this happens, where Rising Sun Kick is not off cooldown before we press our Yulon. We still want to press our Yulon at the correct timing, because we don't want to, hold on to it until Rising Sun Kick comes off cooldown. So what we do is we cast our Yulon, we do cast an Enveloping Mist, we cast our Rising Sun Kick. You can, ignore this. It's just because I was going to go to 2 stacks of my Renewing Mist, and I didn't want to sit on 2 stacks, which is another thing you have to do, because it's a higher priority list, right? We don't want to sit on 2 stacks of Renewing Mist. But I go through, and I cast Enveloping Mist until my Rising Sun Kick naturally comes off cooldown again, right? This is, in my opinion, the ideal scenario. What I mean by this is that you have, at this point, a pinpoint position where you will stop casting Enveloping Mist and start casting Soothing Mist, right? Because you've given yourself a time frame from pretty much between this Rising Sun Kick and the next Rising Sun Kick, that's where you could spam your Enveloping Mist. You know that you can get X amount of casts off before you have to press it again, and then you could just go into your Soothing Mist and start spamming out your Vivify, right?
Gotcha.
So this happens a lot in just weaving in your rotation, because you're wanting to press Rising Sun Kick as often as you can. It's not always going to be up to make it look like this, where you press, beforehand here, I would be Rising Sun Kick, and it's not always going to look like this, right? Sometimes it's going to be in the middle. That's fine to do. If the scenario is let's say you've casted 4 Enveloping Mist, and then you do a Rising Sun Kick cast, and then you do another Enveloping Mist cast, at that point, I would just do the Rising Sun Kick after the 4th Enveloping Mist cast, press Soothing Mist, press Enveloping Mist, and then just start spamming out Vivify, rather than waiting again for the Rising Sun Kick to be back off cooldown, right?
Yeah.
I would say the point where you would want to wait on it is if your Rising Sun Kick is within 2 casts of Enveloping Mist at the beginning of Celestial, then you could wait for the next Rising Sun Kick to be off cooldown before you start spamming again. But if it's anything beyond the second cast of Enveloping Mist, you would just want to send it pretty much.
Okay. Because at that point, you're missing your ramp timer just by
Yes.
continuing with enveloping mists. And I think that
Yeah.
was another mistake I was making, is I was doing it more Disc Priest, or at least my experience of Disc Priest. I don't know what the ramp time is now, but I was doing it 10 seconds before a damage event. So I think my ramp was well and done, and then I'm doing the tail end of it before the damage actually comes out. So
Yeah.
I'll switch it to 6.
Yeah. And the easiest way of just sort of looking when to do that is going onto a website called Lorgs. Lorg shows you the cooldown usage of every single spec in the game on whatever boss it might be. So we can go look at Zara, for example, and we can look at, when was Yulon used? And quite literally, you could just copy this. So let's say you're proccing Mythic Sarkareth, for example, and you want to look at, when people use their Celestial. So you can see here that no one uses their Celestial beforehand. Or everyone uses their... Pretty much everyone just copies what I had for timers, essentially. That's how generally it goes, because I'm usually the first person to parse on a fight, or the highest to parse on a fight, and everyone sort of copies what I do. So everyone's using their Celestial beforehand, and they're going into the Glittering Surge. You can see here at 5 seconds. and then everyone's using pretty much their Celestial back off cooldown again, and going from that point onwards. So this website shows you where you could use your cooldown. So if you don't know when to pop your cooldowns, essentially, you could always just refer to this website, give them to your healing officer, or if you're your own healing officer, do your own cooldown at that point, and just assign it as such. I recommend always looking at either a log by myself or a log by Vor. You could also look at Living as well. Living Miss or Skyrix. Both of them, or all these people rather, are all very like trustworthy in terms of their timings and whatnot. So you could always look at them for like if you need a log reference or whatever it may be. Those are the people you can look at, right?
Good deal.
But yeah, that's just basically like the Celestial rotation. So it looks a little bit complex at first, right? And it's like, wow, there's a lot of buttons in succession here. And then you realize that you're never really changing this, and because you're never really changing this rotation, it becomes pretty easy. I can also show you the one variation. So the one time you actually do change it, funnily enough, is when you have Thunder Focus T not up before, but during your Celestial. So this rotation, it's funny because we like in the theory crafting channel for in Peak of Serenity, we argued about this for like 4 hours once. Between pressing Rising Sun Kick first and then pressing Thunder Focus T Renewing Mist, or pressing Thunder Focus T Renewing Mist and then pressing Rising Sun Kick. I was of the opinion that you should press Thunder Focus T and Renewing Mist first and then press Rising Sun Kick, but both of them work, and honestly, we figured out it doesn't fucking matter.
Gotcha.
But this is a scenario where you were trying to force the use of your 4 set, right? You still do your Shayoun's Gift beforehand, you're still casting your Celestial, you're still doing your 4 or 5 casts of Enveloping Mist. The difference is you don't have the cast of Thunder Focus T before, you do the cast after your after your Enveloping Mist spam.
Okay.
This guarantees that you have 4 set proc, so you have the 40% increase. It also gives you haste, which is good. So this is a little bit of like the controversy between it. So in actuality, the math supports that you should press Thunder Focus T Rising Sun Kick and then just ramp and not press it on Renewing Mist at all.
Oh.
But this gives you more HPS in your Celestial window, but it gives you less HPS outside of the Celestial window, which is not really something that we want to do, just because our Celestial window is such a high overheal period anyways. So if you know that you need to, let's say you're like 3 healing a boss that would normally be 4 healed, and you really need to carry the HPS with your Celestial, what you could do in that scenario is do that Rising Sun Kick over Renewing Mist instead, to make sure that you get the extra buffed healing from that point. It also means that you could go into your Vivify spam quicker, right? Because you're not actually changing anything from this rotation, technically, because Thunder Focus T is off GCD, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this rotation here gives you the same sequence as this. It's just this one here is pushed back to the first one. So this is just the duration of the rapid diffusion that was first applied here. So it's 6 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2. It gets extended back up to 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So you guarantee get the 2 casts. Instead, with this rotation, it would end here rather than here.
Gotcha.
That's the only difference. But they're both good. I would recommend doing the TFT before as often as you can, but if it comes up during, you could definitely do that. As you can see in my VOD here, I do my TFT during, so you can watch my cast sequence here. Yulon, Enveloping Mist, Enveloping Mist, Enveloping Mist, and then Thunder Focus T. Rising Sun Kick, do the Soothing Mist, do the Enveloping Mist. So I still get 4 Enveloping Mist casts off, but I make sure to get that Renewing Mist cast off beforehand as well. This gives me the guaranteed proc of my 4 set, which is here Soulfang Vitality, and this covers the entirety of my Vivify spam window, right?
Gotcha. And so you said as much as possible use Thunder Focus T beforehand still. And is that's also true when you're running the build that doesn't have Mana Tea and stuff? Like, do you ever do the second ramp that you showed where you use Thunder Focus T last? Is it more valuable to do that because of the force set, or do you just still want to, as much as possible, do it, before you do your enveloping mists?
As much as possible before, but just like I said with like the flow of RSK as well, sometimes it doesn't always line up, and you want to get the most amount of uptime on Thunder Focus T because the average haste increase from Secret Infusion is very good, right? So whenever you can get it up, you do. And if you're holding on to it for a significant portion of time, like you see here, I hold on to it for like max 6 seconds at a time. I'm never really going above that. But if you ever do hold on to it for a significant period of time, you're just going to lose out on potential HPS that you could be gaining, because it is kind of a big deal to cast it as often as possible, right? And
Gotcha.
any green cast here, you can see Renewing Mist. There
Uh,
is a build that plays somewhat differently. Um, I don't think you need to worry about it right now. But if you find yourself plateauing, like I said before, and you want to sort of like reach a new level, you can play around with Focus Thunder in Unison instead. But I won't get into that today.
hmm.
Um,
Okay. And so,
but
I think that I've been too nervous to spend my Thunder Focus Tea, and I need to just send it more because I was worried about not having it up for the next ramp, and so a lot of times I only used it on my Celestial,
oh
so I should be using it in between as well, correct?
yeah,
Okay.
so as you can see here, four piece uptime is 74%. What this means is we don't really care when it's used. I personally do not even track the 4 set. A lot of people do track the 4 set. I personally don't track the 4 set just because I know that it has a very high uptime to begin with. And also because Vivify just does a lot of healing to begin with. Like, even here in this log where it's doing 95k HPS almost, it still is 33% overhealing.
Mm,
And that should be pretty low for a button that, has smart healing built into it with Renewing Mist, right?
right.
Um, and this is just because when you get 4 set and when you're stacking with Cloud of Focus as well, your average hit of Renewing Mist is insanely high. So you can see here the average hit of it is 40k, which is insanely high for a cleave heal. Like an AoE cleave heal, hitting that hard is nuts, right?
Yeah.
So odds are you're probably going to overheal quite a bit. You can see the max crit hit as well is 318k.
Mm,
And the max normal hit is 400 or 174k. I can't speak. 147k. And this is pretty much like 35, almost 50% of most people's HP bars. So when you have like 14 renewing miss out, odds are it's going to overheal anyways. So getting the 4 set proc in most scenarios doesn't actually equate to more or less HPS, just because it's going to overheal anyways, right? It might look good in the if you click on overhealing, like if I go to my on pull on Suckreth, I can look at this 6-second window here and see I'm doing 1.8 million HPS. But in
mhm.
the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because 75% of it is overhealing anyways, right? So
Gotcha. I think that's something that I'm stressing too much about. Like sometimes, I chalk a ramp to be completely bricked just because I don't have manatee in it or whatever. Like, I think I've been focusing too much on making sure that I have the Soulfang infusion.
yeah, it is very, very good. Um, and to just go over your questions here, because I know you had a whole bunch of questions listed out. So some of them we sort of already answered in terms of like keeping TFT.
Mhm.
How could you use extra TFTs without screwing your Elon and whatnot. Um, Basically, just like you just send it. You don't really care if it's on it or not. In terms of struggling how to respond to big raid damage between ramps, I kind of touched on that before, where you're just pressing Soothing Mist and then you're pressing Vivify, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to be standing in mechanics and killing yourself, obviously, to do it. But if there's ever healing that needs to be done, you're instead trading out Blackout Kick cast for pretty much Vivify cast, right?
Always
Vivify
with a
is
soothing. Well, yeah, unless it's do you still just send the instant vivifies for vivacious vivification? Are you just kind of sending those anytime they're up and there's healing to be done?
if I'm moving and I can't sit and plant, yes. But if I'm ever able to plant, I always want to cast Soothing Mist beforehand.
Okay, even
Just
even
because the
with the proc.
20%, yeah,
Okay.
well, it overwrites the proc anyways,
Yeah.
which is probably a bug. I'm not quite sure. But because we have a 20% increase to our healing just from pressing Soothing Mist and then pressing Vivify, um, we want to make sure that like if we ever get the chance to plant and press Soothing Mist, we are doing that, right?
Gotcha. That makes sense.
So here you can see a little bit of a scuff rotation. What needed to be done here was I needed to heal myself essentially. Um, so I was at like 30% HP. I cast Enveloping Mist on myself, and I was still very, very low. So I just cast Soothing Mist to save myself, cast Vivify to save myself, and then I do Rising Sun Kick, and then finish the ramp. and then it's very scuffed, but it ends up kind of working out. It is what it is sometimes. Try to your best ability to just achieve the ramp and go through with it, but don't kill yourself to do so, right?
Yeah.
Always stay alive, always prioritize staying alive over anything else. So if you need to do somewhat of a scuff rotation like this to keep yourself alive, like I did here, definitely do that. But as you can see, mostly I'm just casting Vivify, and this is how you would heal through it. If you're ever below 4 Renewing Mists, which should never happen if you're playing correctly, because you should always be at, like, generally speaking, 7 Renewing Mists out.
Okay.
Like, if I go to my graph here, you can see, on average, I have about, like, 7 Renewing Mists out. I go as high as, like, 13 at some points. But it should generally be a good time. Like I said before, it should generally always be a good time for you to press Vivify. So you should always be getting healing out of that. Just make sure that you're never sacrificing other things like Renewing Mist and like Rising Sun, right?
Okay. That's a big change from what I was doing, because I was doing it more like the Mythic Plus style of just throwing out the instant procs of Vivify as much as you can for maintenance healing and stuff. But knowing that the very first Vivify after a Soothing Mist is also buffed by Clouded Focus is big.
Yeah,
I'll switch to doing that.
yeah. Just sort of go through. So Chi and Ancient Teachings is something that you can play. Um, it's it is just straight up worse than
Yeah.
Clouded Focus, unfortunately. A lot of people aren't really fans of Clouded Focus. I myself am sort of indifferent to it. I like doing HPS, so
Yeah.
I'll do whatever does HPS. But here I have a log that I just wanted to test out to see how bad it really was. Um, so obviously comparing the two here, I have the log of Rashok playing Clouded Focus, where I'm doing 273k HPS comparatively to playing Ancient Teachings and Chi, which only does 210k or 211k HPS.
Yeah.
And this isn't even with bad RNG. This is with actually very good RNG. And towards the end, it does do a pretty significant amount of HPS, but it is very much capped on HPS comparatively to the last minute of Cloud of Focus here on Bradshock. You see that it's 100k to HPS difference, which at that point it's not really negligible at that point. It's like mandatory to keep the raid alive. So
Right.
I definitely recommend, even though the Mythic Plus playstyle does play Chi and plays Ancient Teachings, I definitely recommend primarily focusing on Cloud of Focus as much as you can, but you can go into Heroic or whatever it may be and just sort of mess around with Chi and Ancient Teachings if you want to. It's much more chill than playing Cloud of Focus. It's very like brain off gameplay, and it still does a good amount of healing to like kill the bosses, right? Because
Yeah.
210k on Rashok Mythic is definitely killable, right?
I've
So
found good luck with it because I haven't had a chance to really bring it as much in Mythic because we've been extending, we're not reclearing, and when we're playing, we're doing Sark, and so I haven't really had a chance to do it too much in Mythic. So I've messed around with it in Heroic, and I've had good success with it just because there's so little healing to do in Heroic, and it kind of snipes it. Um, the Chi does compared to Yulon. There's not as much healing to take advantage of the big ramps and stuff, but I wanted to practice it in the VODs and logs that I put for you in the spreadsheet with Yulon.
yeah. So go through here. You find yourself ending boss fights on very high mana with both Yulon and Chi. Is this a problem? Yeah. Pretty much for every healing spec that you play, regardless of if it is Holy Priest or if it is Mistweaver, whatever healing spec it should be, you should always be pacing yourself to spend all your mana towards the end of the fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being high on mana in like the midway through the fight means that you're effectively losing out on cast that you should be, necessarily getting. On a fight like Mythic Sarkareth, for example, you want to be spending, and on like Mistweaver has like some of the best healer mana in the game right now. It can itself very quickly, but it could also preserve its mana very very well. But as you can see in phase one here, I'm pretty much going down to like this is like not really full spamming it, but I've gone down as low as like 20% mana in phase one, um, which is pretty low. And that should be generally where you're looking to go with your mana as well, in both playing Holy and with playing Mistweaver Monk as well. Because we have Rashok's Molten Heart, we get a lot of HP or a lot of mana back from that.
Mm-hmm.
So in phase one, you should definitely just be looking to pretty much spam out as much mana as you can. You could do this through for Holy Priest, it would be prayer healing and circle healing. but for Mistweaver Monk it's Vivify. So because we don't cast Enveloping Mist outside of our Celestial, whenever you get the chance to just press Soothing Mist and press Vivify, you press that. That's just basically how you spend it.
Okay.
I recommend for everyone that I coach that you should be ending fights. Like if you can't end fights, what you should be doing is just playing to spam out as much mana as you can without sacrificing your rotation. And then once you if you at like 30% on the fight, that's fine. Like if you're practicing at least. Because then you can go through the log and see like, okay, here I myself at, 30% on the fight. How can I eliminate cast to not myself, right? So then you go through and you comb like, okay, at this point I overhealed 70% of my Vivify. I could probably not spam Vivify here, right? And that gives you a good understanding of like, how much HPS you're actually capable of doing through spamming your Vivifies as hard as possible, as well as like what you need to improve upon in terms of spending mana and not spending mana, right?
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
At what point in the Yulon ramp do you Mana Tea? So with both Innervate and Mana Tea, for Innervate, you want to call it before you even use Yulon, because Yulon costs 5% of your mana pool to spend, or to summon it, rather. So if you are calling for Innervate, you call it before Yulon. Once you get the Innervate, you press Yulon, and then you spam. With Mana Tea, you use it exactly the same as you would with Thunder Focus Tea here, where right at the Soothing Mist, you could line up the Soothing Mist and the Mana Tea. It doesn't cancel the cast of Soothing Mist to do this, but you just basically put it on this because you're reducing the cost by 50% on all these Enveloping Mists, so you want to reduce the cost of these Vivifies by the same amount, pretty much.
Gotcha. And we're still a ways out, but do you think that's going to change once we hit tip 1.7 where they're doing
Yeah,
a whole Mana Tea revamp?
100%, yeah.
Okay.
That I will write a guide for. We haven't really fully finalized it just because we don't know if it's getting changed or not, but it is likely going to be something that we are quite often pressing, and it's going to be a little bit of annoying press,
Oh,
but
gotcha.
we'll get to that when it comes to that point.
Okay.
Um, Struggle when to use Shayloons outside of Yulon ramps. So, there are 4 buffs to Shao House. There are, in my opinion, 3 good ones and 1 bad one. The 3 good ones are obviously Haste, Crit, and Dupe. The Triage is the worst. So the Triage starts scaling below 50%, and it just gives you like 1% for whatever the HP. I don't know the calculation, or I don't remember the calculation off my head. But pretty much, you only get max value if the person is at 1% HP, which is, they're dead.
Mm.
So with that in mind, it's our worst buff by far. It's still a buff, and it still gives you quite a bit of HPS, but it's not going to give you as much as Lessons of Fear would or Lessons of Despair would. So outside of our Celestial, because we obviously want to use one on it, whenever you have Lessons of Fear, you always save it for Celestial. There's no scenario where you cast it off of Celestial. Lesson of Fear or the Haste buff, you always cast on Celestial. When you get Lesson of Despair or Lesson of Anger, you could use it on Revival. You could use it on your Vivify spam windows. So let's say like that you're going to be doing a lot of HPS in the next 15 seconds, right? Because you're going to be spamming out Vivify. You would cast it before the damage is taken, and then just spam out the Vivifies, right? It's a very like 1-for-1 on that. Lesson of Doubt, which is the triage one, you want to be using it on Revival primarily. It's very good for Revival since you want to press Revival after the raid has been taking a whole bunch of damage, right? Everyone's going to be like 30% HP. You press Revival, you get a whole bunch of healing, right? It naturally goes hand in hand with that. So the easiest way of playing it is to always save your stacks for your Celestial in some capacity. Like always have at least 4 stacks for your Celestial. And then if you are going to cast it again in the period between Celestials, try to cast on 3 or 4 stacks. And if you want to, let's say, filter out a buff, because it's a stack deck system, which means it has to go through all the buffs before it can cycle through another buff again. Let's say Lesson of Doubt is there before Fear, and you're going to be casting your Celestial next. What you can do is just cast Lesson of Doubt at like 1 stack, just to guarantee that you get Lesson of Fear, and get enough stacks for it, because that's good to do. It's fishing for the buff. We want to do that. You need a weak core to track that. There's one on Peak of Serenity in the Mist Discussion channel. It's pinned.
Okay.
But essentially, it would be like looking at the bottom here. So let's say, I'll go back and see it here. Point where I have it. So So I know that the stomp is coming out here, right? I know that I'm going to be porting back into melee range, and I'm going to be spamming out Vivify at this point, right? I have 3 clouds. My Yulon is coming up in a little bit, and I have Lessen the Fear or Lessen the Doubt as my next buff that I can get, right? So I'm going to cast Shaylin's Gift here, because I'm going to get 9 seconds of crit buff that I'm going to use inside my window where I'm going to be spamming on myself and spamming on the raid with Vivify. So I'm going to get a lot of CDR from it, right? So I'm pressing Soothing Mist, I'm spamming on myself, and you can see my revival cooldown going down in the bottom right.
Mm-hmm.
And my next buff is Lesson of Fear. So here, I wouldn't cast it because I have less than 4 clouds. So 4 clouds gives you 14 or 12 seconds duration, which you want because that covers the entirety of your Celestial. Without having 4 clouds, we don't cast our Shaylin's Gift. So here I roll Lesson of Fear next. That means I go out. I don't cast my Shaylin's Gift on my Celestial. Instead, I just do my Celestial normally. I'm healing through that. And I save this Lesson of Fear until the next Celestial that I get out, right?
Even if it goes past 10 stacks on the
If it goes past, well, it won't because it can't with the duration of it. But
Okay.
here I cast it at 8 stacks, and I get 24 seconds of uptime, right? And this is going right before I'm going to spam on myself again. And it's also going to feed into my Celestial as well, right? So I cast it preemptively there because I know that it's going to overlap for the 12 seconds here on my Celestial ramp. So I still get the buff. I still get it before as well. And it just helps solidify Renewing Mist because the increased haste is going to give you tick rate, which is very good at that point.
Gotcha.
Um,
It's not on the spreadsheet, but just something that I want to make sure we hit before we have to run out of time.
yeah.
It for our Sark prog, our current heal team is me on Holy Priest, and then 2 Holy Pallies and a Shaman. And the Shaman is he does a lot of HPS. He snipes a lot of the healing and stuff, and so he's reliable. And if I wanted to bring, would it be trolling for me to bring my monk instead of priest because it has 3 melee healers and because we lose symbol of hope? Like, is symbol of hope in your experience mandatory for phase 1 of Sark?
Nope.
Okay.
Not at all. Nothing. No healer is mandatory in any of the fights. The last time we actually had a fight which absolutely required a single healing spec was pre-nerf Stone Legion Generals. It required 2 shamans. You couldn't kill it without 2 Resto shamans.
Gotcha.
But ever since that point, there's never been a fight that absolutely requires a single healer to kill the boss. I would say the best comp for you guys would probably be Mistweaver Double H Palar Shaman. But it depends on your level of comfort. Obviously, don't play something that you're not comfortable with after you put in so many pulls on Holy Priest. Definitely go with what you're comfortable playing and kill it with that. And then, on farm, then you could play Mistweaver Monk.
If
If you don't have the Monk buff to begin with, I definitely recommend getting it through Mistweaver because it's going to be more beneficial to play Mistweaver and get both the auras, or actually all 3 of the auras, rather than playing a Holy Priest at that point.
Yeah. Okay. And if we lost symbol of hope, because right now we're using our defensives on, we're clearing on second breath, and then we're clearing on the 4th disintegrate. Would you just have, would you have everybody save their defensives for the 4th disintegrate, or would you still have them send it on the second breath where everybody clears?
So with a Mistweaver Monk, you could do something that you can't do with any other healer on this fight, which is mass clearing on the second breath. So if I go through a VOD here, I could find and show you what I mean. So you'd pretty much just use Diva Aura and have like 14, 15 people stand in the second breath. It puts out a hot, or a dot rather. Wait, kill Sarkrath already? No. Go back.
I think that's what
No,
we're
it should be
currently
this.
doing. We're doing tanks and healers clear on the first breath, and then all the DPS clear on the second breath, so like 14 people. And then everybody who still has their disintegrate one is clearing on the last disintegrate for glittering surge. That's currently how we have it set up.
Yeah, so here I'll just show. This looks like, fast forward a little bit. Tap fast forward. So we have our glittering surge, and we die because we didn't gateway. So glittering surge goes through. The first breath comes out. Some of the melee clear, so we get 6 stack, or no, it was 8 stacks there. I think it's 8 stacks on this first one. Yeah, so we go to 8 stacks on this first one. They get mass dispelled. Come back. Everyone lines up on this line here. People pop their personals. You take 1 tick at the breath. Whole raid clears. 14 stacks. You mass dispel it off. Everyone takes X amount of damage, but because they have their personals up, they're kind of chilling at this point. And you just revival the dot off. So you mass clear at this point. Everyone has their breath clear pretty much at this point. Apart from, I think, 1 tank is the only person who doesn't have it. Clear right here. Or no, it's 2 DPS and a tank. That wouldn't clear. And then you just do your Celestial as normal. But yeah, that's how you would sort of play with a Mistweaver. You can only do this because you have a Mistweaver, but this allows you to clear much earlier, so it's much more safer for everything beyond that point. Right.
And so right there, you're stacking Revival and Yulon on the second breath?
No, that was just Revival and
Revival.
AM.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Revival, AM, and Personals is what we use there.
Okay, cool.
And
Awesome.
you could use like Healing Tide Totem as well there, AG and Ascendance if you wanted to.
We're currently
you just have to see.
we're using Spirit Link on that as well because we want.
I want to use Spirit Link on the second. Definitely use Spirit Link on the last Glittering Surge.
Okay.
100%.
We were
that is like the scariest part.
We were originally doing that, and then we swapped it so that it was up in time. I think for going into phase 3, we were trying to use it there, but I don't know. Play around with that.
He should be playing Ancestral Protection. Yeah, so he was playing APT. So the APT would just be used alongside the SLT. So in the end of P1, I would even have our Archaman in for this pull. Let's see. So at the end of P1, which would be here, when everyone does the mass disintegrate and we line up, actually this point here. So everyone does the mass disintegrate here. APT would already be down. It would encompass the entire area here. So anyone who dies either from missing their soak or just dying to the ground stuff would then take the APT. They would take it after the Glittering Surge as well. But this SLT basically just makes sure that you don't die to anything. So here obviously we wiped because we had a bad clear. No one really cleared. But if you had SLT down, pretty much everyone is like stabilized at that point, so no one could really die unless they're getting like full one shot, which is very, very safe. I'd say like SLT is that's like the best point for it. It's also just like the most comfy because that point is very, very scary with all the embers coming out. So
okay, and running 3 melee healers is not necessarily a problem, especially with the strength of Holy Pals, or
not particularly. Like I said before, it depends on what you want to do in terms of like getting the monk buff or not. If you want the monk buff in the raid, which I recommend you do because it's 8% healing and it's also 4% avoidance, definitely get that. But otherwise, stay on Holy Priest. It's good to have more ranged healers, generally speaking, than melee on that fight. And just in general, not really healers, just like more range on that fight than melee. But it really just depends on what you feel more comfortable with and what your raid wants to do. For what considerations do you have when you sign Mistweaver CDs? Like I said before, you basically just copy whatever's on Lorgs, like whatever other people are doing. Odds are they have a significant reason for it. So, how many seconds do you start before ramp? 5-6 seconds before. You want, the goal is to line up Vivify with the damage coming out. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today.
Yeah.
We went a little bit over what our time, but it's fine.
Yeah, this has been great, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I appreciate the work that you put in as well to make this. Is very, very nice to see. The big things to note: press Rising Sun Kick, press Renewing Mist as often as possible. Get the Celestial rotation down. Practice it as much as you can. Log yourself in Heroic. Practice as much as you can. And if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to DM me at any time. I'll always be here to help out. And apart from that, that's it for today.
All right, awesome. And one last question. I recorded this for my own, use and stuff like that to go back and check. And then I understand I'm a teacher in real life and I teach lessons and stuff. So I understand the concept of selling knowledge and stuff, but
Oh, go
it
ahead.
would
Okay.
okay. Yeah, I was gonna ask if it was okay if I posted this on my YouTube channel or whatever. If you'd prefer to keep it private, then I can just keep it for my own use.
Nope, I don't mind at all.
Okay.
Do what you wish with it.
All right. Thank you so much. You're the man.
Yep, thank you very much. And like I said, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to ask me throughout the week. Other than that, have a good weekend and enjoy.
All right. You too. Thanks.
Take care.
See ya.